Hi everyone, and thanks for joining today's live Q&A. We have a question here from HG, a practice manager based in Canberra of a firm that has 15 people in it. And the question is, we're considering commissioning professional headshots for all the partners. It seems expensive. Is this really worth the investment? Well, thank you for the question, HG. Let's start by looking at the cost of the photographer. So my guess would be that a photographer for a full day will typically fall in the range of about $2,000 to $3,000 a day. It might go up to, say, $5,000. For a half day, you might be looking at, say, $1,500 to about $3,000. And that cost will usually incorporate all the post-production, so the editing afterwards, the travel, any assistance that they might need to bring as well. So you're a 15-person firm. So my guess is at most that you have about 7 or 8 partners, and probably more like 2 to 4 partners. Over the years, I've organised a lot of shoots for lawyers over, across different firms, and I'd say you want to be allowing about 3 to 4 photos per hour, or 3 to 4 people, I should say, per hour. So you could fit in kind of 3 partners in 1 hour. If you have 3 to 4 partners, you're probably only going to need, sort of maximum 2 hours. If you're to get the whole team done, which I would recommend at least getting all of the lawyers done, I'd expect that you would need a half day, so it might take 4 to 5 hours to get all of the lawyers done. So if we look at a half day and we go at the high end at what I said, and that was $5,000 for a full day, which you won't probably need. But if you have 15 people and you divide that by $5,000, you're looking at about $333 per photograph. At that low end that I quoted, you're looking at about $133 per shot or per person. So if we meet in the middle, just to give you an idea of sort of what this might cost per person, I'd be budgeting roughly about $250 per person. When you think about that cost, as in isolation, $250 per person for their professional photo, it's going to be used across their website profile, their LinkedIn profile. It's going to be used if they go to speak at anything, really like across all your marketing materials. So if you're doing capability statements or maybe PowerPoint decks, it's probably going to be appearing there. Now, I look at it as the law firm, you're selling people. That's kind of it. So from my perspective, $250 for a photo that's going to last you a few years is an amazing investment. We're talking about a fraction of like 1 billable hour for most lawyers. I also think about what's the alternative, and the obvious one is sort of doing it DIY with your iPhone. But I think really, like, as I said, the law firm's selling its people. I think you can do better than that. I think where the biggest challenge for law firms and photography is, well, how do you manage smaller teams, or how do you handle it like if you're looking to grow and be adding lawyers on a regular basis? My best advice for that is find a photographer that has a studio that's close to your office. So the thinking there is if you add a new team member, rather than bringing in the photographer to your office every time someone joins the firm, is you can simply ask them just to travel to the studio. And that's going to be a much cheaper exercise than having to bring out, say, a photographer, because they're probably going to charge you a half day every time. Whereas if you can just have them go to the studio, that's going to be much more cost effective. It's just going to be simpler, and you're going to have that professional photo for everyone that in the firm. That same logic applies for smaller teams. So if you're a firm and you only had 2 or 3 people, if you can go to the photographer's studio, you're going to save a bit of money there as well. To wrap that up, I think professional photography is a well worth investment. I'd say it's not an area to skimp on. It's not an area to do DIY. I would totally go and use a professional photographer. We have a question here from Adrian, who is a principal at a Singapore family law firm, a solo practitioner. And Adrian has asked, what domain name should I register for my new law firm? So let's start with the last part of the domain first. The highest level, so we're talking about the bit after the dot, the final dot. And the highest level is called a TLD, and that stands for a top level domain. So that's your like .coms, .nets, and those type of ones. And then we have a CCTLD, which stands for a country code top level domain. So think .com.au, .co.uk, and so forth. For you in Singapore, it's going to be .com.sg. And I think for a law firm, your highest priority is getting that local domain. It's really important for SEO. Whilst the reality is far more nuanced than what I'm going to explain now, Google will typically rank local domains based on the searcher's location. So if your searcher, which might be a referrer, a prospective client, someone who's going to join the firm, whatever it might be, if they're looking for you in Singapore, that .com.sg will appear before the .coms and any other, say, country codes. Now, as I said, it's a bit more nuanced, but it's certainly a factor. So I think that the local domain is the main one to get. So your firm name, .com.sg. If the .com's also available, I'd also purchase that. I think that's just a good way to, it's just a good protection mechanism. After that, once you have those, ideally 2 domains, but if you can only get the .com.sg, that's totally fine. Once you've done that, I think everything else, like all the other types of variants, become a bit less necessary from a brand protection mechanism. I generally think, like, for your primary domain, you want to avoid what I'd call, like, I need a better way to describe this, but the weird ones like .net, .biz, .info, they're not as well regarded. I think it's also worth noting here that a lot of countries will make sure you have an entity in that country before allowing you to buy that domain. So that's something that's worth noting. So you might find that it's available because a lot of the local ones will have that kind of protection mechanism built in. No one can just go register it and sort of squat on it. You mentioned you're a solo practitioner, so I don't imagine this is the case, but maybe in the future, if you have offices in multiple countries, so for example, if your main office is in Singapore, but you're looking to expand into Malaysia, just by way of example, you might want to consider buying both local domains, but you'll need to check if you can do it in those countries, as I mentioned before. How you use multiple domains, so if you had multiple countries, it's a pretty complex topic that I can cover in a Q&A later if that's of interest to anyone on the call. So now let's have a quick look at what goes in front of the TLDs, so the CCTLDs, so that bit before the .com.sg. And my advice is that you want to keep that as short as possible. That can be really tricky to do. It's the web's been around for 20, 30 years in its sort of current format. And so a lot of the domains are already purchased, but I would sort of go for something as short as possible. If your firm has 2 or 3 names, you're a solo practitioner, so it's unlikely, but if it's got, say, 2 or 3 words, you might just want to use that sort of first word or keyword. For a firm with multiple names, you might just want to use that first name. You might also want to use like an abbreviation if that makes sense to do so. I'd recommend against registering a domain name with a hyphen. I think it gets harder when you actually have to communicate your email address or web address with someone. So if someone asks you what's your email address, you always have to say hyphen. It becomes just that sort of annoyance, I would say. Again, as a brand protection mechanism, you might want to register the variants of your name. So if I use our fictional example that we always use, the firm being, say, Pearson and Schmidt Lawyers, you might register, say, pearsonschmidt.com, and you might also register pslawyers.com. You will need to pick a main one. So I think have a think about have a search on some of those domain tools, about what you can get. Definitely go for the .com.sg, pick a name that's short, register those ones. But I've left my most important tip to last. If you haven't already registered this, and you can still take action on this even if you have already, but I would suggest make sure you have full access and ownership of your domains. They'll be managed in what's called a DNS. It stands for a domain name system, and there's plenty around the web. If you Google register a domain, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands of them. So the site that you register your domain with will also be by default your DNS. And your DNS and your domain, in particular your domain, it's an asset, and it's a really important asset at that. The best way I can describe it is if you don't control your domain name system and you don't own your own domain, it's possible that a rogue or an unprofessional service provider might do something with it. And if they do, your website might go down. But I think that's actually the least of your concerns, because your domain name's also attached to your email, and having your email go down is obviously a far bigger problem for a lawyer. So whatever you do, make sure you own your own domain. It's registered to the firm, or you personally, whatever it is, make sure you own it and that you have access to that DNS at all times as well. We have a question here from James C., who is an associate at a corporate firm in Manchester. And his question is, I've personally got good engagement on my LinkedIn posts about recent regulatory changes, but our firm page gets almost no interaction. Should I just focus on my personal profile instead, or is there value in building both? Thanks for the question, James. I'd say it's normal for personal LinkedIn profiles to get a lot more engagement than company pages, and I'd say it's especially the case in professional services firms. And the reason is that people engage with people, not brands. So your success with posts about regulatory changes on your personal profile shows that your network trusts your insights, and that's a lot harder to replicate on, say, a company page. That said, I think there's value in building both, but you need different expectations and strategies for each. So if we look at your personal profile, which is your primary focus, I just keep doing what you're doing. So keep leveraging that, and you're getting that strong engagement, and people are naturally going to follow and interact with your individual content rather than your firm's. Continue sharing updates as you are, but on occasion, if you want to grow that company page, you might tag it in the post. So you might tag it. It'll give people that prompt to kind of click on it and also follow your firm page. This is kind of a no-brainer. I imagine you're already doing this. If people are leaving comments with you, engage with them. It just helps with visibility, reinforces your expertise and so forth. Now, if we look at the company page, the company page is probably, you mentioned you're an associate, so it's probably managed by, say, someone else in the firm. But regardless, think about the company page as being it's like kind of, while the engagement's going to be low, it still serves as a credibility marker for, say, potential clients who look up the firm. I would suggest you'd want to use the company page as like a repository for key content. So you might put some of your regulatory updates there, the ones maybe that have the highest impact or the broadest impact. Might also include like case studies and other thought leadership, like in different areas. With company pages, instead of relying like on organic engagement, so just sort of posting and hoping that people see it and comment and like and so forth, you can, on the admin side of the page, you can actually share that with team members and get them to then share and interact with the posts. Now, that's going to amplify your reach. If you really want to amplify your reach, you might want to consider LinkedIn ads. Obviously, you can't do that with your personal page, but you can do it with a company page. So you might consider LinkedIn ads for, say, some high value posts or really like content that you want to get in front of an audience that you might not already have, say, connections with. And that can be a pretty useful way of growing that reach, is running some ads. With the company pages, I would also say posting with consistency is a useful thing to do. Don't expect immediate traction. They tend to take a lot longer to build momentum. But if you keep posting with some sort of consistency, you will start to notice that your follower count on the company page will move up. So best approach would be, I'd still prioritize your personal LinkedIn presence. I think that's going to always be the kind of the main driver of any engagement on LinkedIn, but maintain that company page as a professional hub. If you really want to increase that company page engagement, as I said, focus on, getting other people to share and like that kind of content. Consider the ads. You might want to post on your personal profile and have the company repost your posts. It might help, but I think ultimately your personal LinkedIn is where the real traction will happen. Thank you, everyone, for attending today, and I look forward to speaking with you all next week.